everyone. Today was absolutely awful and I wasn't going to film because I don't feel great, but the show must go on. If you can hear eating in the background, it's Katie Bennett. She's wasting away. I thought I would talk about something that's very important to me, mental health. And I suffer from depression and anxiety. And when I was going through my books, I realized I don't have a lot of fiction books that deal with mental illness. I have a lot of biographies that do. And biographies are great. I love that. And I love having real people talk about their real problems. But I also like being able to read it in stories and, you know, place myself in that situation. And I just find that weirdly comforting in some way. The first book I would like to talk about is one of my favorites. It's the book I recommended to my husband when we started dating. I wanted him to understand the way my brain worked, and this book is kind of a funny story by Ned Vicini. Really just captures it perfectly. It's about a boy who decides one night that he's going to hospitalize himself because he's feeling suicidal and all of these things. He realizes that he can't just check out the next day. So he goes through the program, and an inpatient program, and he meets other patients, and everybody has different kinds of mental illness. The way that his brain works is really similar to the way my brain works. He has these things called anchors and tentacles, and the anchors are things that he likes, things that help him feel better. He really likes drawing maps, and they don't have to be maps of things. He likes to make maps of cities, maps of brains, and it's really incredible. But then he has tentacles, which are things that just like come out of nowhere and he has no control over. And my husband really grasped that concept fairly quickly, and it really helps for when I'm having a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And he's really, like, he uses those tools that he learned from that book to help me get through it. So I highly recommend that book. I haven't read more by Ned Vicini because he sadly passed away. He died by suicide a few years ago, and I felt such a loss from that because from reading that book that he had written, I felt like I could do anything. I felt like if he can get through this, I could get through this, because he based it on an experience that he had had when he was younger. And then when he passed, I was like, why am I even doing this? But that kind of stuff happens, and he wouldn't have written that book if he didn't want the message that I had received to get across. So I highly recommend that book. The next book is Where Did You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. It is told through emails and letters and investigative reports, and it's about Bee and her father trying to find her mother, Bernadette Fox, and she's become a recluse, a hermit, if you will, in her own home. She used to be this really forward-thinking architect, and she built this amazing house one time, and then she felt overwhelming pressure and she decided to just hide herself from the world. And a lot of things like I really related to with Bernadette's character. She's very eccentric, but she has a lot of difficulties with her anxiety. Of course, there's no cure for mental illness, no end-all be-all kind of fix it for it, but she kind of finds a way to deal with it. And I really like this book. It makes me really happy. It's a really fun read for something that is as difficult as mental illness, but it's really fun. The last fiction book I have is Stranger Than Fanfiction by Chris Colfer. This book follows Cash Carter, a really famous child star, and he meets up with 4 of his fans from his TV show, and they go on a cross-country trip. And what they don't know, something's wrong with Cash, and he's behaving really weird to them, and they kind of want to ditch him, but in the end they find out what's going on. And you look back on the book and you're like, wow, it's so interesting the way different factors can affect your mental health and the way that you come off to people. So I love everything by Chris Colfer. He's written the children's series The Land of Stories. He's written another book called Struck by Lightning that made me cry. But this is a really quick read, really good. Now we're going to jump into some real people. I mean, authors are real people. Now we're going to jump into some biographies. The first one I picked is from Carrie Fisher. This is Postcards from the Edge. See, she has 2 other books there's Wishful Drinking and The Princess Diarist. And they're a lot about growing up with a famous mother, Debbie Reynolds, if you don't know her, and growing up with Star Wars and having to deal with all that. And she's a huge mental health advocate. And a lot of the things that she would say, a lot of the things that she would do just would make me feel so good. And I look up to her so much. And yeah, she's had a rough past, and I mean, who doesn't? But she did a lot of good with what she had. And I highly recommend these if you want a really good look at the way, again, like with that Stranger Than Fanfiction book, the way that outside factors can affect your mental health. The next books that I would like to mention is two. They're both by Jenny Lawson. They are Let's Pretend This Never Happened and A Mostly True Memoir, and then Furiously Happy. This one came out first, and then this one. I love both of these. Jenny Lawson suffers from a very specific kind of mental illness, and I can't remember the name of it. But I know she does these treatments where I think it's shocks to her brain. I'm not entirely sure. It is on her Instagram. So she talks a lot about her anxiety and the way she deals with things and the way her brain works. She likes to collect taxidermy animals, and she likes to build little doll houses, and she's really funny and really cool. And it's a really good look at how your relationships and mental health need to go hand in hand, whether it's a relationship with your partner, with your family, and she has a really hilarious outlook on the way her mental health affects her. And it makes dealing with my mental health a little bit more tolerable. The next book I'd like to mention is Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. They run a true crime comedy podcast called My Favorite Murder. And I know it sounds weird, but they talk about awful things like the JonBenet case, or I can't remember anybody, Ted Bundy, and they are really afraid of it, but they have this belief that I share. If you talk about awful things, it won't happen to you, or you'll be better prepared for when it happens. And it's just a really fun way to like laugh at yourself and laugh at these fears. And they talk about their issues with mental health, drug use, relationship with food. I'm not gonna call it the other things, and ways to not get murdered. It's something that I am definitely anxious about. I always think I'm going to get murdered. I always imagine the worst thing possible that's going to happen to me, and that's part of the anxiety. The last book I want to mention is a book that I've recommended to other people. I recommended it to my sister-in-law. I recommended it to one of my best friends. And when I was reading it, I was just like, where has this been my whole life? It is called Dodi Secrets for the Mad. And Dodi is a YouTube artist. She writes a lot of amazing songs, and she got her start on YouTube, and I hadn't heard of her before I saw this book at Target. It has a lot of her lyrics, poems, journal entries from growing up, experiences from growing up, and she deals with this thing in her mental illness it's either called derealization or depersonalization, and it's where there's like a fog around everything that you see and the way you live your life. And she said it's like being drunk, the weird drunk fog that you get, and that you can't quite remember everything. It's just all glossed over. That's how she says she lives her life. And that is a really hard thing to treat. It's a really hard thing to diagnose. And because of those things, there's not a lot of resources to utilize. So I really related to her. I don't suffer from that personally, but because of that, it increases her depression and her anxiety. And again, the brain is such a complex place. So I just found that really interesting and really helpful. And I felt like there was somebody else I could relate to and weirdly rely on. So I'm sorry I'm kind of low energy, but I promise I'll bring it back around for next week. So I still don't know about the finger guns, but see you later, partners.